Hi, this is the currently known as podcast, where we look at the people behind everyday things. I'm your host, Leela. Hi. And this episode, we're going to be looking at famous lay people in medicine. Like, what's so special about lay people in medicine? Usually in medicine, and really a lot of things in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, are usually like a lot of the concepts and things, especially in medicine, are named after the people that developed said concept or thing or idea. For example, Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of cancer of the lymph nodes, was named after the British physician Thomas Hopkins. Another way that diseases can be named are the actual people within a place where an outbreak usually occurred. An example of this would be Legionnaire's disease, which is a type of pneumonia. And it comes from Legionnaire's bacteria, which is usually from fresh water. And this happens a lot in hotels, a lot of places where a lot of people gather that are interacting a lot with fresh water. And Legionnaire's disease was named after a conference in July of 1976. It took place in the American Legion in Philadelphia. And so this is when this like weird pneumonia-like outbreak occurred, and they were like, "What's up with this?" And so because this outbreak of this new form of pneumonia took place, they were like, "Okay, because these first cases took place here at this American Legion, we will name it after such." Also, I should note like things like the Wuhan disease for COVID-19, things like calling a certain virus that started in 2019 originated in Wuhan. That doesn't call for people to be calling the COVID-19 Wuhan virus because it is incorrect. COVID-19 is just a specific type of coronavirus. Most people at some point have had a strain of coronavirus that is not COVID-19. Anyway, so also diseases can be named after the people who have actually had this disease, so like patients of this disease. More famous one would be Lou Gehrig, who is the namesake of Lou Gehrig's disease. Lou Gehrig was a famous baseball player, was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS. I believe he was diagnosed at 36, and he died not that long after he was diagnosed. In the US and Canada is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. So on this episode, we will be talking about two medical things that are named after famous people. First being Bogart-Bacall syndrome, and the second being Satchmo syndrome. So, Bogart-Bacall syndrome. What is it? It's a voice disorder, meaning that it's a thing that affects your speaking organs. Think your larynx, your voice box, your windpipe, that stuff. The things that make you talk. So it affects the organs of your voice, and it's from people that usually speak much lower than their actual register. And this is over time. This is not like a you spoke too deep and boom, sorry, you have Bogart-Bacall syndrome. Because it affects your voice, the people that are usually affected by this are people that speak, do a lot of talking for a living. So like people that do radio and news, also specifically actors and singers are also affected by this mainly. What happens? So pretty much two things. So because your body is using more energy to speak lower than your actual like vocal range, it just takes up more energy, and with that there's a lack of breath support. And also the muscles that you use to breathe and to speak, so that like breathing would be like your diaphragm and your lungs, and speaking would be things like your larynx and your voice box, they become like stiff and like rigid. So it's caused by speech and communication disorders and, and like general throat problems. So stuff like laryngitis or vocal polyps or throat cancer even. So that's like the actual medical part of Bogart-Bacall syndrome. And so who are the Bogart and Bacall people? of Bogart-Bacall syndrome. It's named after a famous husband and wife actors, Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, some of my favorite actors of all time, personally. As actors, they were very much known for their like low, husky voices, that type of vibe. Yeah, when this was being studied, one of the researchers noted, like, yeah, people were coming in sounding like dudes were sounding like Humphrey Bogart and ladies were sounding like Lauren Bacall. That's interesting, I guess. So I'll study it. And the funny thing is about Bogart-Bacall syndrome is something I did not know until doing research for this was Lauren Bacall, like her non-acting speaking voice, like her voice in real life was like much higher than the voice that she had put on for like film and stuff, which I've seen quite a few Lauren Bacall movies and that was a shock to me. Just, I don't know, I didn't expect that. I just thought that she just had like a naturally low, raspy voice, but I guess not. So the other medical epidemic that is named after a famous layperson is Satchmo Syndrome. So Satchmo Syndrome is from a muscle rupture, and this is due to overuse. This is the muscle being the orbicularis oris muscle, which is a muscle that surrounds your lips. This muscle is responsible for the puckering motion of the lips, and also it's known as like the kissing muscle. So like, with a lot of muscle issues that are from overuse, and a lot of the times it's due to the nature of work, like carpal tunnel with people that use computers a lot. The Satchmo syndrome is from the overuse of the orbicularis oris muscle. And this affects people that play woodwind and brass instruments, and specifically trumpet players. Now, why specifically trumpet players? Well, when you play brass instruments, I mean, and woodwind instruments, but the reason why this affects this group, specifically brass players and within that trumpet players. So when you play trumpet, or really any brass instrument, you have to put your lips together in a certain way and then blow a lot of air very quickly. So because of specifically you like closing your lips and then also having to blow a lot of air, usually in a quick fashion, will do damage over time because you are using this like muscle a lot and putting so much like pressure on it. It will eventually rupture. People that experience Satchmo syndrome often experience lower lip pain as well as difficulty hitting higher notes, difficulty actually sustaining like long notes, which like reading the testimonials for people that had this, as someone who has played music in the past, it was really like heartbreaking to hear these people that were playing music and can no longer play music for usually a few years because they just couldn't play. The treatment that is used is surgery and physical therapy to kind of like get back into shape. So the person that Satchmo syndrome is named after is Louis Armstrong, who is a famous jazz trumpeter. He was affected with this orbicularis oris muscle rupture and couldn't play it for about a year. So I discussed those two things: medical eponyms that are named after famous people in medicine. I mean, so the role of like famous people in medicine. I want to talk about the pros and cons. Some of the pros include just general awareness of something that is not um, really talked about much until like a famous person does, and this kind of puts a like a famous person uh, as like a familiar face to something. Famous person bringing awareness to something that may or may not have been well known to like the overall public. When an average person would probably see a celebrity, discussing a certain medical issue that they, have, it kind of puts a familiar face to a lot of people to this like relatively unknown medical thing. It brings more awareness to the general public. An example of this would be Angelina Jolie. In 2013, she announced that she underwent a double mastectomy and discussed that she was tested for the BRCA1 gene. And because of that genetic test and the BRCA1 gene being found, I believe her mother and her aunt died of breast cancer and or ovarian cancer. And so she got tested, found that she had this gene, and decided, as a preventative measure, had decided to get a double mastectomy. And I believe also a hysterectomy.
Hello, hi, editing self here. So, technically, Angelina Jolie had got her fallopian tubes and ovaries removed, not her uterus, which is what a hysterectomy is. The removal of your fallopian tubes and your ovaries is a different medical procedure than what a hysterectomy is, which is removing of the uterus and other reproductive organs. I wanted to make a note of that. Okay, cool. Back to the podcast.
And that is because with the BRCA1 gene, people who have this gene are at a much higher chance of getting certain types of breast cancer and other reproductive cancers, and with that, dying from those cancers. And so in 2013, Angelina Jolie, famous actress, came out about this. The amount of people that went and got referrals to get the BRCA1 gene genetic test had apparently went up by twofold. They doubled, which is a lot of people, going to get referrals for this genetic test that I'm sure that maybe a lot of people may or may not have gotten the gumption maybe to do, or would not have been aware of to go do that if it weren't for this famous actress uh, coming out and being public with this diagnosis. Another pro of, famous people and their role in medicine is the stigma. When a famous person comes out with like some sort of medical issue, especially ones that have a lot of stigma attached, this famous person that I guess can be seen as like, oh, well, this is like a relatable person, or this is someone that I look up to. And if this person can have this thing that is incredibly stigmatized, then like, is there really anything wrong with the disease in the first place? And so a famous example of this would be Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson, famous basketball player. In 91, he came out and said that I am HIV positive. And this was a huge, huge deal because HIV, especially at that time, was heavily stigmatized because it was essentially seen as people that got HIV were gay men that just are inherently promiscuous, and people that used intravenous drugs, also with blood transfusions. But with the first two groups, it was seen very much as like a moral failing. It's kind of like, well, you shouldn't have been gay. You shouldn't have had a substance use issue, or else you wouldn't have gotten HIV. Sucks for you. Or athletes in general are seen as like the pinnacle of health. And so to see this like athletic dude like Magic Johnson come out and say like I'm HIV positive was a huge deal because it showed like this, this straight guy who was supposed to be like the pinnacle of health, having this diagnosis was like a huge deal. So another pro for medical eponyms would be that it makes medical diagnoses of things less jargony. And so according to Dr. Denit Ariel, he said this. So when I'm educating them, his patients, about their diagnosis, I try to use the simplest terms so that they know what's going on with their body, which is great. Medicine, like a lot of things, like law, the military, those are the two things I thought of, have a lot of jargon associated, like the in-group language of things. Usually with jargon, people that are not working in these fields have no idea what you're talking about. For example, I'm someone who deals with hypoglycemia. What is hypoglycemia, you ask? It's a medical way of saying I have low blood sugar. Hypo meaning low, and then glycemia being sugar. The gly being like glucose, glycerin, sugar, and then emia. So like if you weren't someone that works in like medicine or don't have like background knowledge of medical things, you probably wouldn't know like what a term hypoglycemia means or hypertension. You know what I mean? So, and also it just has like a very like simple, snappy way of just saying like I have this thing. Those are some pros of having famous people involvement in medicine. what are the cons of famous people within medicine? One would be one con would be a conflict of interest. In other, I don't know if this happens in other places outside the United States, but the U.S. is has a lot of commercials for specific prescription drugs. Like one of the YouTube ads I got earlier was for psoriasis. I'm like, okay, cool. That doesn't affect me, but thanks for advertising it to me. Um, you know, and sometimes with these like commercials, they will have like a famous spokesperson as like the face of this specific, medicine or what have you. An example of like a famous person touting out like a specific medical thing. First person I could think of, Khloe Kardashian, and her coming out with that migraine medicine. I don't know what it is, but she got a lot of backlash for it. And the thing is, it's like, how do I know you, Khloe Kardashian, are touting, the spokesperson for this specific medicine I don't remember the name of? Like, how do we know that you actually, one, take this, that you use this treatment, and two, like, how do we know that you aren't just saying that you use this specific medicine because you're being paid a bunch of money to? So that's an issue. I don't know if that person is actually genuinely selling you something, or if it's just because it's for the money. Sometimes medical eponyms, like the people that they are named after, are not great people. One example being Hans Asperger's of Asperger's syndrome, which is within the autism spectrum disorder. And the namesake, Hans Asperger's, who was a doctor in Vienna during Nazi Germany. Over time, he was kind of known as like this heroic guy, saving these disabled children from, being killed in, these camps. And a couple of years ago, it came out saying like, no, 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 no. He worked with like he was like working with the Nazis and had a lot of pro Nazi sentiments. The idea of, like ideological purity and that nonsense. Yeah, Hans Asperger actually was not a heroic doctor. He sent children to die. So just sent hundreds, thousands of kids to die, which one should anger anyone. I'm 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 laughing because I'm really upset and just ugh. Um which should, horrify anyone. And there are, some people saying that um we should rename Asperger's syndrome because it is named after a really, you know, screwed up human being. Well, I mean, we should rename Asperger's syndrome not just because it is just named after like, um someone that like did bad stuff, like, outside of medicine, or even had used certain treatments that today wouldn't be um deemed as like morally acceptable. But like, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. And like, like not only that he was like, was had Nazi party ties, but specifically he had sent like children to go and die. I didn't mean to end on a bad note. I just had to bring that up. I did because, like I said, there are a lot of people throughout medical history that have done a lot of very messed up stuff. So yeah, that's what I got about famous people in medicine. If you wanna find me, you can find me on currently known as pod@gmail.com. Um, thanks for watching and or listening.